Hello, this is Brian.
And this is Stephanie.
Welcome to the making and the remaking of a codependent mind. This time we're going to talk about the subject of conflict in relationships.
And in keeping with the theme of the season, Relationship Toolkit, we're going to do a functional account of conflict. So how can conflict be understood as a tool in relationships? What is it for? How is it useful? So we probably need to clarify what we're talking about when we're talking about conflict. Because the literal definition of the word is a disagreement or a incongruence or an incompatibility, but it's used for anything from two people arguing over who gets the last piece of pie to two nations going to war. So there's a wide range of experiences, I guess, that are classified as conflict. And so we're going to, I guess, obviously fall more on the side of two people arguing over the last piece of pie than nations going to full-blown war.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because really those two things would have felt the same to me in previous relationships. Like basically all types of conflict felt like some kind of existential threat to me. It set off my trauma.
And the trauma that came from your childhood, that was really initiated in your family of origin. So something like your dad not being able to find a kitchen utensil was this huge explosion.
Yes, right. And so that's what conflict became for me immediately, right from the start of life. So, someone else that can't find a kitchen utensil wouldn't have necessarily handled it that way. And there may have still been conflict, but it wouldn't have been this explosion that then now I'm scared.
So it's very different than my childhood home, where, for instance, we would have arguments around the dinner table. And I remember when we would have, say, friends over or romantic partners would come into that environment, some of them had a very different experience with conflict and disagreement in their own homes and would get very nervous to hear us all arguing because it felt threatening to them.
Yes.
Where for us, it just felt a natural way of interacting.
I would have been one of those people that would have reacted that way because, it all made me anxious. Watching it in movies made me anxious. Watching hockey games and people get in fights, I don't like that.
Sure, yeah. So I think it's useful for people to think about how conflict was handled in their home and how they're maybe bringing that into their relationships such that any disagreement or incompatibility or incongruence feels, as you said, almost existentially threatening to themselves or to the relationship. Because, it's a very common and natural phenomena when there's no enmeshment in a relationship. So there's a you, as we've talked about, there's a clearly defined you, there's a clearly defined me. That means that there is going to be, no question, different experiences, different perspectives, different feelings, and different opinions. And sometimes those will be in opposition to each other.
And my goal, having a history of enmeshment, was to not have that. Because that made me way too anxious, the thought of any sort of incongruence.
So let's just go back up just briefly again to what we were saying earlier. We're talking about these kind of, natural disagreements or incompatibility that arise when you have two distinct, separate, autonomous people forming an intimate relationship and interacting every day. We are not talking about conflict that is akin to a war. So in relationship terms, we're not talking about conflict that arises from abuse or from profound betrayal, for instance. We may do an episode on betrayal and repair, but
it's a totally different topic, really.
Yes. And if people are responding to these natural disagreements or oppositions that happen in a relationship with abuse, so with belittlement, with guilt, with aggression, then that relationship needs to end. Conflict is, at that point, a destructive tool. And in fact, the abusive people are using it as a weapon against you.
That's right. And using it as a way to gain control.
But we do think, given that it is an inevitable experience that we all have when we're in relationships, we do think it can be a productive tool.
Right. As you said, when we're not enmeshed, because enmesh is a side tool to avoid it.
And even those of us who didn't grow up in a high conflict home or a conflict adverse home, it's still unpleasant. Like it can be unpleasant or uncomfortable for most people to be in conflict with a person that they care about, with the person that they live with.
Yes, absolutely. And then add in someone that is trying to learn to cope with being from a conflict averse or a conflict. It's difficult to make that transition.
And people talk about not being in a relationship because they need to work on themselves, which is an interesting phrase because it brings up, well, what's the work that they're doing and what's the work they need to do, what's the work they think they need to do. But we've talked about this, and some of the work we think needs to be done is that if you're going into an intimate relationship, and given that conflict is going to be inevitable in that relationship, if you are authentic to yourself,
that's the key,
which you want to be, then in order to go into a relationship, you need to have some level of ability to feel uncomfortable emotions or painful emotions and think painful or uncomfortable thoughts.
Yes. Emotional capacity. And I really did not have that for a majority of my life. And I did not have it when we met.
But you did develop it.
I did develop it. Yeah. So it can be developed within a relationship.
Sure.
So this back to what you said, like working on yourself. Yes, it's very, very important. But if you are going to work on yourself, that is a crucial piece of work you should be doing, is making sure that you have emotional capacity. You can understand your emotions, you can feel them, you can allow things like anger, and you can feel shame and not try to avoid it.
And it's not perfect. This is something you're still working on.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, they're called painful or uncomfortable emotions for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just shut them down immediately, then there's going to be problems because you're never going to let the conflict arise. So you're never going to get the benefits of that conflict.
Yeah, and so part of it is feeling entitled to having a perspective. It was another thing that it was one of my tactics, was to really not have a very solid perspective on anything, very, very solid opinions. I could be easily swayed. So I may start a conversation, and then the moment I see someone possibly disagreeing with me, I could easily just go, oh, yeah, no, yeah, you're right. That makes sense. Because I haven't really spent much time thinking about what it is I actually believe.
And you didn't feel that you were entitled to have your own beliefs because you had people in your life consistently who told you that you weren't.
Right. They told me what I was supposed to believe, even if it was my own feelings. No, that's not what you're feeling.
Yeah, what you're supposed to believe and what you're supposed to feel. So having, again, some capacity, as you said, to feel uncomfortable emotions, to feel in conflict with someone, and then also to feel entitled to the perspective that you have and the feelings that you have. That's work that needs to be done in order to even allow yourself to be in conflict. And again, then to benefit from what conflict offers, which I guess we haven't said yet, the ways in which conflict can be a productive tool, not just a destructive tool.
Right.
It can absolutely be destructive. I think that's more obvious how it is if it's handled badly, if it's misapplied, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it can be productive even if it causes the end of a relationship. It can be considered productive because if you're learning something, you're learning that you're incompatible. But yeah, it's useful because it's this knowledge and understanding piece we've talked about before. It really helps with the knowledge and understanding of yourself and of the other person, of being able to allow this dialogue.
Right. So as you use the word learning, it's a tremendous learning tool. Learning about the other person, learning about yourself, learning about the relationship. One thing may be that it needs to end or that it's different than you thought it would be, which is great to find out at all points, early, middle. It's always good to learn more about the relationship that you're in and that you're putting all this time and energy into. And conflict is an excellent tool for that. And it can also be a tool for connection in that very often on the other side of it, if it's navigated well, you feel much more connected to the other person. Well, anyway, I feel that with us.
Yes, me too. Right.
This made me think of when we were talking about this episode, the practice of science and scientific progress, how science moves forward. And it very much involves conflict because good science involves developing hypotheses and then developing ways to test those hypotheses so that you uncover conflicting or opposing results. The conflicting or opposing results, the ones that don't just confirm what you already think, are really the ones that are going to push your theory forward.
Yes, all right. Yeah.
So you take those results and then you take it back into your hypothesis, and then the theories that you form are much more robust and much more expressive of the actual world. So this is what we're trying to do with conflict in our relationships as well, is to see this as a learning tool and to take that conflict and find a way to reconcile the two opposing points of view into a larger understanding of you, of me, of us.
It helps me a lot when I remember that, because otherwise it's too easy. When I allow myself to be overcome by some kind of fear, then I go into performance mode, and then it's not about connection.
So let's talk about performance mode, right? Because yes, that was really your approach to conflict in the past. In part because it wasn't aimed towards reconciliation. It wasn't about what's your perspective, what's my perspective, how can we reconcile those two and bring those together?
No. Right. So in the case for me, the outcome was just that I needed to feel safe again, which for me meant you're not angry or something. I'm coming up with it whenever I need to do to kind of diffuse a situation. That's like my main goal. I'm not thinking about exactly what it is you're experiencing. I don't really care if I'm all nervous and anxious and I just want this anger to end.
A successful resolution for you would be the other person is not angry, or the other person is not upset. Mm-hmm. The other person is not disappointed. Because it's not always anger, certainly for us, with us, right? It's not that I'm angry and you want me to stop being angry. Sometimes I'm upset or I'm disappointed or I'm confused.
Yes, right. It all felt like a threat to me. It kind of triggered my threat response system in a similar way. So whatever I need to do, even if it's to lie, if it's to agree with you, to say you're right when I don't think you are, to take responsibility for something that isn't my responsibility, whatever I need to do to make this smooth and back to the way it was before this disagreement happened.
We talked about in the detective work episode, if you would just bury the evidence, or I would just use the science analogy, right? So you would just like bury the results. That what you were burying was your perspective. You were just like, okay, my feelings, my perspective, my opinion. I'm going to make it not matter. And so the result was not reconciliation of perspectives, but appeasement.
Yes, this appeasement, this approach that I use is a version of fawning, because really I am kind of sent into this trauma state when I'm feeling threatened, and so my go-to was fawning.
And when we think about your narcissistic partners, how they approach conflict, meaning how do they approach when there were two perspectives that were in opposition, when there were two feelings that were in opposition, when there were two experiences that were in opposition? You would go to fawn, they would maybe be triggered as well, and they would go to fight.
Yes, it was always fight, and part of that fight being whatever controlling behaviors, some kind of domination, like just needing to be right, but even turning things that you said is just some kind of difference of emotion about something. It had to be a fight. Like that was it. Just that's what disagreement meant when these people were triggered.
You mentioned making the bed with Jay, for instance, like putting the sheets on the bed would turn into this conflict, and of course the conflict would immediately escalate into some sort of she was right, you were wrong, and you needed to be corrected.
Yeah, God, this one just makes me laugh. It just seems insane, because like really, yeah, it's just a simple task of two people putting a fitted sheet onto a bed. But yeah, if say it gets turned the wrong direction or it's upside down, or like the first sign of something not happening correctly, it's like, what are you doing? No, turn it around. God damn it. Just like, wow. But yeah, it became a fight. It became that I was doing something incorrect, and that was a direct attack on her. And so she needed to attack back, defend herself by attacking. You're doing this wrong.
And one person had to be doing it right, one person had been doing it wrong. It's not just that it can be confusing to put a fitted sheet on a bed,
right,
and coordinate that between the two of you. So what we want to get to a place is, what does it look like to approach conflict as a learning and connection opportunity rather than as this fight or fawn response?
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we're going to recommend to break out the power tools.
Yes. We've been really starting to lead into this in the book that we're writing right now, too. We've kind of landed on these 3 big power tools that we've now done episodes on in this season: empathy, curiosity, and honesty.
So those are tools that they're going to help out any tool that you're using. So conflict, again, we're trying to understand it as a tool for learning and growth. But in order for it to do that job, it needs these other tools to be in play. And their empathy, curiosity, and honesty. And one piece of that is remembering to direct that not just towards the other person, which we've talked about in those 3 episodes, but also to remember to direct them towards yourself.
And I think that's a place that I still struggle more often than not. I've gotten so accustomed to trying to figure out how to appease the other person that, I'm learning how to handle my emotions, but I'm still applying it almost exclusively to the way you're reacting. So even if it's empathy, I'm still forgetting to be empathetic with myself.
Or curiosity, you're still forgetting to be curious about yourself, that you deserve that as well.
Right. I can completely overlook if I'm, say, actually upset or angry about an interaction we had.
And then empathy and curiosity, if it's just directed at me and not directed at yourself, almost become a version of fawn. They almost become performance.
Mm-hmm. My old system is always trying to find a backdoor way of using the same behaviors, it seems like.
So to direct it towards yourself would mean things like asking yourself, not just asking me, but asking yourself, what am I feeling? Mm-hmm. And why am I feeling that? And saying to yourself, I understand why I feel this way. It makes sense. It's okay that I feel this way. And allowing yourself to be honest that there is a conflict.
Yes.
That you do think or feel or experience differently than me. And that, again, that's okay. And it makes sense. And so just kind of starting there, make sure you're starting there, that you go into these kind of conflicted discussions or situations, which again can be uncomfortable for both people, can involve emotions, but that you're going into them with a posture of empathy and curiosity about yourself. Like you've allowed yourself to think about your own experience and to feel entitled to that experience.
Yes, right. But then also directing that curiosity at the other person and not getting too, because I think with this all or nothing approach, I'll get derailed and maybe now I'm only thinking about myself. Say I feel shame or something and that's it. I can't even think about you at all. Now I'm just focused on the fact that I'm feeling shame or I'm feeling afraid or something. I think even in those situations, I'm not really necessarily being curious about the shame is part of the problem. So
just shame is a non-starter, right?
It is.
Once you start feeling shame, then it's really hard to continue down any productive path, which is why it's perfectly okay to take a break as well. And that's part of feeling empathy for yourself and asking that the other person offer you that empathy, which you're entitled to empathy and curiosity and honesty in conflict situations. You're entitled to it from your partner and you're entitled to direct it at yourself as well. If it is overwhelming, because it can involve powerful emotions on both sides, perfectly fine to take a break and to tell the other person that you need a break.
Yeah, and that is important to do that rather than walking away or something.
It's important to communicate that,
yes.
Is that what you're saying? Yes.
Yeah, it's important to communicate that rather than just say getting up and walking away. And then now you're just being avoidant.
And we've done this for sure. Both of us have done that. Both of us have needed a break. I sometimes ask for a break because maybe I'm feeling angry and I'm having a difficult time managing that anger in a productive way. And I don't want to say anything or do anything that's destructive because even though I'm angry, I recognize that I'm not allowed just to dump that on you.
Right.
So sometimes that's like, okay, I need to take a walk or something. I just need to calm down a little bit here because I'm struggling with my feelings of anger.
Yeah, and for me, as we've already said, shame is usually the time that I find I need to take a break because it's really difficult to not fall into performance or faux apologies and things like that we talked about in the last episode when I'm feeling shame. Because I need to get out of it. I need validation of some kind to enlist you to help me get out of it. And now we're not even having the same conversation.
And the point is reconciliation. That's what we're pointed towards. We're not trying to win or lose.
Yes.
We're trying to understand both of the perspectives or feelings and to find a way to reconcile them, to say, what's the umbrella theory that all of this can go under?
And so then this is kind of a good way to talk about then if we do take a break from a conversation, then, but that the key is that we're taking a break from it because it's likely unresolved. We haven't come to an understanding or agreement. And then now it's just hanging out there.
And in the past, when that might happen with us, certainly when it happened with your previous relationships, you would just take that opportunity just to let it go completely.
Yes. Yeah. And that worked in the previous relationships because it's two people trying to avoid their emotions. So I would usually probably end the conversation with some kind of a false appeasement. And then, they may be angry for a while, but now I'm just waiting for their anger to go away. That's it. And then it goes away and yay, we're back to where we were.
And that's dangerous, right? Because what conflict is exposing is a disconnect, is an opposition that needs to be resolved. Otherwise, it just gets bigger.
Yeah. And I wouldn't leave those scot-free because, now I have resentment, and I wasn't focused on that. I mean, I didn't really realize that. But yeah, every time one of those happened, I had shame for betraying myself and lying to say, yes, you're right. And then I also had resentment because this person won this battle.
And you didn't learn what you needed to learn.
No.
About the other person, about yourself, about the world around you. So you just had this conflict. What we're looking for is that reconciliation, is to learn and for this relationship to grow. So the break has to be just that, a temporary break. And we need to come back together, which we do, and take it up again.
Yeah. And I could think of kind of this progression that I took when it came to that over the years. Like say in our earlier years. So part of when you're taking this break is hopefully you're doing some reflection that maybe you had a hard time doing. You took a break. You may take a break because you're feeling angry, but now you're calming down and you're reflecting. I'm taking a break because I'm feeling shame, but now I'm allowing myself to sit in the shame without in this what I found to be a triggered environment.
Yes, that's a great point. I mean, those are the moments when we try to direct those things towards ourselves. Like once I get past the anger, or it could be hurt too. It's, sometimes I'm like, I'm just too hurt, right? I feel like I'm gonna lash out or something. So when that emotion gets a little more manageable, then it's easier time to be curious and to really, okay, what am I thinking? What am I reacting to here? Where's this hurt coming from, say? And again, to be empathetic to myself, like do some self-care, and to be honest too about where it is coming from and how do I take that back to you in the most honest way I can.
And I have evidence that you've always done that. And in the beginning of our relationship, I did not. And we have evidence that repeatedly I did not. So when we would have a conversation that triggered shame, and I at the time didn't know it was shame or anything, I would go off and I would even say at the end of the conversation, yes, I'll think about this. I'll figure this out. And then I wouldn't, because I may spend 5 minutes trying to think about it and then just get washed with the same shame. And I'm triggered in my head.
Your relationship with conflict has really changed over the course of our relationship. That's one of the more obvious places where there's been growth, because yes, early on, first of all, early on, we had almost no clear conflicts.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because you were just
lining up.
You're just lining up. And that wasn't really, I mean, we are very compatible in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways that help minimize daily conflicts, for instance, in terms of our punctuality, how clean both of us like our living situations.
Like we're both morning people.
Yes. But nevertheless, I do remember even saying to you, like, when are we going to fight? Uh-huh. We should have a fight. Just get over with. See what it's like. Because actually, that's another way that conflict is useful. It's useful to learn how the other person handles conflict. Like that's something that's useful to know pretty early on. And we just never had it. And then we started to have it because it's just going to come up. And the reconciliation work that you did early on looked very like the reconciliation work that I'm assuming you did in your previous relationship.
The very first step back in our earliest days, which was me just continuing what I did before, which was just wait it out. Like I just said earlier, I wouldn't go think about it because it gave me too much shame and fear to think about it. And then I would just hope that you wouldn't bring it up again. And if you did, I'm thrown right back into it.
Yeah. So, but say I did, then you would move on to.
Then I'd move on to what we talked about in the previous episode, apologies, faux apologies, just reflexive apologies. I don't know exactly what I'm apologizing about because I'm not understanding anything.
Although sometimes you seem to, like sometimes they seemed authentic.
Well, yeah. I mean,
they expressed a real understanding of the situation.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's not always false, but I think a lot of times it involved some kind of action that I was afraid to take also.
I think what it was is that you did understand and appreciate my perspective. So you had empathy for me, but you didn't have empathy for yourself.
Yes.
So you understood that I was hurt, say, and why I was hurt. What you took that to mean was that you were a terrible person and that you hurt me.
Yes.
Not that you had a different experience of the situation or a different perspective, because it can be very true that I get hurt, and it is true that I get hurt and you're not a terrible person. Like those two things don't go together. But I think that's what was happening, is that my perspective was the absolute truth of the situation, and what it meant was that you were a terrible person.
Right. That's kind of the shame and blame cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what I would do in that is say there was a period where I did start to be the first to go, say, with the reconciliation, but I would start with an apology. I was like kind of lead with an apology and a shame spiral, but the apology would look something like, I'm terrible at relationships or something along those lines. And so what is this for exactly? Like, this isn't actually resolving anything, because that's not true. You know, I may have been terrible at certain elements, but I wasn't just terrible across the board at relationships. And what is that for? Is that so that and how are you supposed to respond to that? Oh, no, you're not, like, oh, make me feel better, please. Because I'm going to say something like I'm terrible at relationships so that you can help relieve my shame.
The reconciliation would look like this. I'm hurt because of this behavior. You saying, yes, you're right, I'm terrible.
Yes, right.
And then I'm saying, no, you're not terrible. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you would resent me. So that wasn't working. So but we did move beyond that phase.
Yes. Yeah, we moved beyond that as we started to do this work. But then there was still a common one. And sometimes I still do this next progression, which is we haven't resolved it yet. The air is still kind of tense because we haven't returned to the conversation yet. Maybe a couple of hours have passed or something.
Or maybe we didn't even have the conversation sometimes. Like
yeah,
sometimes we just, it's clear we had some sort of conflict.
Yes.
Right. Or annoyed with each other or disagreed or something. Mm-hmm. But neither of us really said anything.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm feeling this overwhelming need to address it somehow. But I'm more focused on the way you're feeling rather than what I'm feeling. And I lead with that. So I'm sensing that you're angry or upset or something. And I just start right in with, how are you feeling right now? Are you feeling angry?
I think that's, yeah. So I think because like, if I'm not, then you're like, okay, fine.
Yeah, oh, good, good.
But also that's asking me to be vulnerable, right?
Yes.
And for me to be honest and open and offer my perspective, rather than you being the one that's vulnerable.
Yeah, so I'm forcing you to be the vulnerable one, and I'm making you guide the conversation. Yeah, and so like you said, you may go, I'm feeling pretty good, and that could give me a wave of relief. Oh, if she's feeling good, then maybe this is fine. Maybe it resolved itself. Even though maybe I'm not feeling fine, but that alone somehow made me feel fine. I'd rather match you feeling fine than you feeling angry or something.
That's right. Or if I'm angry, then you'll be angry, right?
Yeah,
You're
right.
okay with that. So it's both an unwillingness or a fear of being vulnerable, but also this not feeling entitled to have your own perspective and your own feelings of the situation.
Yeah, so I may be approaching it, it's like kind of, I'm half approaching it okay. Like I am seeking to understand how you're feeling, but I'm doing it in a way that is a backdoor way of getting out of my own feelings.
And the thing you've started to do somewhat more recently that is really effective is that you lead with your feelings.
Yes, that is so much more effective, right? Because first I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about how I'm feeling. If I'm going to lead with, say, you know what, I'm feeling disconnected. First of all, that's talking about my experience, but I've thought about that. I'm not just going to say that. I've explored it a little bit and come to the realization that I'm feeling disconnected. So it's not just an air of like, I'm sensing that she's angry, I better do something about it. It's, I'm feeling disconnected, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm something about an interaction that we had earlier.
I don't know that you've ever said I'm feeling angry.
I'm feeling angry. Well, yeah, I know. Maybe I haven't gotten there yet.
And maybe that's not as helpful. I mean, I'm feeling disconnected is really something that's easy to hear. It's easy for me to hear that and to have an empathetic response.
And it's more of an umbrella. There can be any number of reasons, and then it's starting a conversation. Oh, you're feeling disconnected. Do you know why? And like, well, I can venture some guesses, and now we can talk about it.
And usually, I'm feeling disconnected as well, like you're saying, which is nice too, because again, if this is about reconciliation, reconciling two opposing perspectives or opinions, etc. I'm feeling disconnected. I'm feeling disconnected. Okay, well, right there, you're starting from a common space, right? You're already starting to move closer together. And really, just to be honest about this, you do that work more than I do. You start that reconciliation process. I think probably in some part because I'm more comfortable being angry or disconnected.
I think you're right, though. Yeah. I mean, I guess if I have to take some benefit from my codependency, like that, like I'll take it, right?
Sure.
Like the anxiety of being disconnected. In the past, it would just be anxiety of it's all lumped together. But it's nice to be able to at least pinpoint that it's disconnection. And because that's my motivation these days, is wanting to understand and feel connected, not just you to not be angry or something like that. Yeah, so I'm using that anxiety. Fine, yeah, because it's a good thing to be anxious about not being connected
to your partner. Yeah, for sure. And you're a sensitive person. I mean, this is why this is certainly could be part of why you were traumatized, is because you are sensitive to other people. You are empathetic towards other people. So that gets activated when we're having a disconnection or a conflict, and that you feel that more than I do.
Or before you do, maybe.
Or before I do. I think that's fine. And I really appreciate that you play that role, when you do that. Because sometimes it can be hard for me to get over myself and reach out again. And you make that gesture. And it's really, again, very effective in moving us towards reconciliation. And it's kind of a good test. Because if you go to your partner and say, I feel disconnected, and they say like, screw you.
Yeah.
Then that's not a good partner.
Right.
That's something that you should be able to say to each other, and for the other person to receive it as what it is, as a bid to try to reconcile the disagreement, not as a ploy to win or to be right.
So keeping in mind the three separate entities, keeping in mind that we're entitled to our own opinions and positions and emotions, and remembering that the other person is also, and those aren't always going to line up, and that conflict is about understanding myself, understanding you, so that hopefully it leads to connection, and a stronger connection.
So when it arises, you could be like, excellent, learning opportunity. I'm going to learn something about myself here. I'm going to learn something about the other person. I'm going to learn something about a relationship. I'm going to learn something about the world through trying to reconcile these two opposing perspectives. And then it can be invigorating.
Yes, it can be. Right. I mean, if I start to have shame or fear come in, that's a hard thing to deal with. But, having that in mind, that this is going to be a learning experience, does help.
So we hope you learned something today here with us. And please join us again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.